deal with. A couple of days ago, I was looking at this commercial that said a revolutionary drink that attacks fat in your body. So if you drink this thing, it'll go and directly target the fat in your body so you can lose weight. And you know, you look at the commercials, you look at everything around us, everything has been fixed to it's all or nothing. You know, we lost that common sense of trying to understand what does it really take to fix our problems. What does it really mean for us to be able to deal with some of the problems that we have. And the example that we mentioned earlier about the cop and the teenagers at the pool, you know, everybody ignored all the facts around that circumstances, right? How many cops were around? Was it the only cop in the area versus the 20 or so teenagers? Was color really a factor in the situation? What were the circumstances? What were the teenagers doing beforehand? And you listen to the news, you watch the news on TV, most of them did not factor in any of those problems. The same thing with the weight loss commercial. It didn't really tell you why you're gaining weight, why you're overweight, how, you know, the fat is built into your body. All what they're saying is, here's a drink, right, this magical drink that when you drink will automatically attack the fat in your body. And if you've done any, if you've gone to the gym, if you did, you know, the slightest research on weight loss, you know that drink is most likely a fake, right? You know, things just don't work that way when you're trying to lose weight. It's a whole holistic system that you have to follow, a holistic program that you have to follow in order to lose weight. So why do we talk about these different things, or why do we talk about those different examples? Especially now that we have the month of Ramadan is coming upon us next week. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Hujurat verses 13, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُم مِّن ذَكَرٍ وَأُنثَى وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِندَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us diversity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us and telling us that there is no one of everything, or there is no one for everything. There are multiple ways of doing things. Cultures understand things differently. People do things differently. People react to things differently. And therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to give us that example of how to deal with this. The Prophet ﷺ, when he was dealing with his companions, when he was dealing with the problems, he would not give the same solution to to different people. You know, and there are plenty of hadith where a man would come to the Prophet ﷺ and says, "O Messenger of Allah, give me an advise me." So, for one person, he would tell them, "Don't get angry." You know, because he knew at that time the circumstances around that person was that person was having anger issues, or he had problems dealing with anger problems. So that was the best solution for that person, or that was the best advice to give to that person. Sometimes people would come and ask for advice, and he would say, "You need to pray some more," or maybe you need to deal with fasting, or you need to deal, you know, he would give each person a remedy. You don't go to a doctor and say, "Hey, I have a problem," and then he'll tell you, "Okay, go ahead and take ibuprofen," right? Maybe if it's, you know, the same general pain, you have a headache or something, but for the most part, they do a diagnostic. You know, there are different doctors for different things, for different problems. We tend to look at things through the same lens, which is the lens that we grew up in. The lens that was formed by our culture, the lens that was formed through the media. The media tells us that cops are not good these days, so now everybody believes that cops are not good. The media will say, you know, this sect or this group of people are bad, then this is what we start believing. Because we allow this group of individuals to control our thought process. Same thing when we're raising kids. When you look at your children, you don't raise and you don't deal with all of the children with the same mentality. You look at the kids that have certain problems or certain ways of doing things, and you deal with them accordingly. And we know the example of Al-Hasan al-Hussein, may Allah be pleased with them, when they saw an older man that, wasn't performing wudu right, and they didn't want to approach him and tell him, they wanted to have that respect, so they, they had that little conversation in front of him to show him how things are done, just to give him that example. So why do we say this, or why do we look at these things in the month of Ramadan, or as the month of Ramadan is coming upon us? Is because we start looking at Ramadan as the fix-all solution to all of our problems. There is no doubt that the month of Ramadan is a blessed month. There is no doubt that the month of Ramadan will give us plenty of ways to get to paradise. Multiple things or multiple paths to get us tons and tons of hasanat. But we tend to look at it as the month of Ramadan is going to heal me. Some of us started a week ago, some of us started 2 weeks ago, some of us started 3 weeks ago, and some of us haven't started yet, but we start looking at Ramadan of, okay, I'm going to wake up in the morning. If I'm lucky, I'm going to, wake up for suhoor, eat some suhoor. If I'm strong enough, I'll stay up until Fajr, pray Fajr, and then maybe go to work or go take another nap. Probably pray the 5 daily prayers on time. If I'm lucky, I'll pray them in the masjid. Make iftar, do taraweeh, and that's it. And the circle ends. We do this for 29 or 30 days, and we feel that this is going to fix our problems. We feel that if I focus on Ramadan, Ramadan is going to fix my problem. Just how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us and teaching us diversity, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us Ramadan and everything else throughout the year to teach us this diversity in connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Throughout the whole year, we're bleeding in all over the place. Our hearts are bleeding because we're losing this faith and this connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our hands are bleeding because we're committing all of these different sins that sometimes we're aware of and sometimes we're not. Our eyes are bleeding because of all these things. So everything is in our bodies, everything is bleeding. So if you are actually bleeding, if your fingertips are bleeding and your feet are bleeding and your face is bleeding, when you go to the doctor, they start fixing you piece by piece. They try to stop the bleeding. They start checking your vitals. They'll check your heartbeat, your blood pressure, your temperature. And then as they check thing after the other, then they start going through the problem. Why are your fingertips bleeding? What happened to your feet? Why is your face or your nose bleeding? So as we go year by year and month by month, we bleed. But instead of going to a doctor that can help us diagnose the problem and fix everything, we go somebody that will just wrap us in a Band-Aid or in a white sheet just to barely withhold the bleeding until the month of Ramadan passes, and then we continue our journey. And then we take off this Band-Aid and let our hearts bleed, let our tips bleed. We lose focus of why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us all of those beautiful things. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us fasting, or the option of fasting Mondays and Thursdays, or fasting the 3 days in the middle of the month? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the month of Ramadan? Have we ever reflected on those gifts and those blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us? We come to the point where praying the 5 daily prayers has become a burden. I have to wake up at 5 o'clock or 5:30 in the morning to pray Fajr in the middle of my sleep, and then I'm already going to lose an hour of sleep. I'm going to waste my lunch hour trying to find a place to pray Dhuhr, or lose my break to pray Asr. Now I have to, fix my schedule to pray Maghrib or Isha. Isha now is 10:35 or 10:36. Some of us are asleep by that time, so now you have to wait until Isha to pray. Taraweeh is going to get even tougher. Most likely we're not going to be done with Taraweeh until 11:45 or 12 o'clock. So you look at those things, and we look at those things as burdens instead of looking at them as solutions. So why are we looking at those fixes and those, healing mechanisms or healing tools that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us as burdens? Where did we lose track of our purpose in life? We're all busy with our day-to-day jobs. We're all busy with raising our kids. We're all busy with making sure our families are well taken care of. We're all busy with making sure that we have, we're providing the best for our families. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet ﷺ never taught us that aspect, and never told us that this is what we need to focus on. As the Prophet ﷺ, when he asked one of the companions, he said, when he asked him, what is wealth? He said, what is wealth? Do you think wealth is when when you have money, when you have houses, when you have all this wealth that we consider wealth? So the companion said, yeah, that's what we believe wealth is. And he said, that's not wealth. He said, the wealth is the wealth of our heart. And poverty is the poverty of the heart. So as we look at our hearts right now, at this moment, how wealthy are we? Forget about how much you have in your bank account, or the lack of. Forget about how nice of a car you drive, how big your house is, what you wear, or what you do for a living. Look inside of your heart. Look deep inside of your heart and determine how rich are you. Because the wealthy, or the richness that we believe in this earth is really nothing, is worth nothing when we stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as we get judged. How am I going to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and see myself being either well prepared or ill prepared? How am I going to look at this month of Ramadan, the month that's coming up upon us within a week? How am I going to start it? I mean, a lot of us are thinking, iftars are not going to be until after 9 o'clock, a whole day of fasting. Then we're going to barely have time to sit down, spend another hour or two in Taraweeh. By the time we come home and sleep and wake up for Suhoor and Fajr, we're barely getting 4 or 5 hours sleep, and then we start complaining. I'm tired, it's hot. We start feeling grumpy. And we're losing focus. I mean, all of this is us losing focus of the main purpose in life. Why are we here? Why am I fasting? Why am I fasting Ramadan? What is the purpose of me fasting next month or next week? What's the purpose of us sitting here during Jum'ah, listening to this sermon and praying afterwards? What's the purpose of me praying Asr? What's the purpose of me connecting 5 times with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What's the purpose of me trying to do Hajj, or give zakah, or give sadaqah, or do whatever it is that I'm trying to do? Is it just so I can, have a check mark to say, okay, I'm fasting Ramadan, I'm doing this, I'm doing that? Or is it because I really want to reach deep inside of my heart to determine how rich this heart is, or how poor is it? أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله ولكم. Ask God's forgiveness. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف خلق الله سيدنا محمد صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. Dear brothers and sisters, the Prophet ﷺ said, in a hadith sahih in Bukhari, he said, لَتَتَّبِعُنَّ سُنَنَ مَنْ قَبْلُكُمْ شِبْرًا بِشِبْرًا وَذِرَاعًا بِذِرَاعٍ حَتَّى لَوْ سَلَكُوا جُحْرَ ضُبٍّ لَسَلَكْتُمُوهُ, or ضَبٍّ لَسَلَكْتُمُوهُ. So the Prophet ﷺ is telling his companions, he said, you're going to follow the actions and deeds of others, that if they go to the hole of a lizard, and in another hadith, if they go to like, the crumbled hole of a lizard, that you will follow them. To teach us that we will come to the point where we will blindly follow people that have nothing to do with Islam. Things that will lead us astray from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And believe me, we all know examples, and we all are doing those things. We just refuse to believe it. The Prophet ﷺ in this hadith is talking about every single one of us, because we lost focus of our purpose. We lost focus of what is it that I need to do. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala create me? How am I going to get judged? Who's going to judge me? Where am I going to be? How is my grave going to look like? We lost track of the fact that at the end of the day, when we all die, we're all going to be buried a few feet in the ground. A few moments later, most people will forget about you. Actually, you go to cemeteries now when people are being buried, and before the whole dirt is put back with the people are laughing and joking, and they completely forgot about you. At that point, we're just part of their past. And if you're lucky, you'll have a child or two or a sibling that will make dua for you. But think about it. Think about your great-grandparents. Do you even know their names? Did you ever make dua for them? Now think about yourself 30 and 40 years after you die. Who's going to remember you? So let's look at the purpose as we come up on Ramadan next week and see how can I revive myself. Where is my heart? Is my heart at the minimum? Are we running close to empty right now? Do I need to recharge my heart? Do I need to focus on Ramadan? And believe me, if you're at empty, it's going to take us a lot of work to get our hearts back to full. Don't expect that your heart is going to go from empty to full in one Ramadan. If you're lucky, it's going to take you 2 or 3 years. The Prophet ﷺ told us and taught us consistency. If we need to start, we can start small, but let's keep it consistent. So let's focus on our goals and our purposes in life. Why am I here? What is it that I am trying to accomplish? If I'm raising my kids, if I'm trying to focus on my kids, am I raising them in the right path for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? To where at least if I die, they're going to continue making dua for me. If I'm focusing on my work, is it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Can I focus my energy for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So as we go into Ramadan next week, let's think about those questions. How rich is my heart? What's my purpose in this life? Where am I going? What am I doing with my life? Am I using these acts of worship as just a form of a ritual? Now we just grew up on fasting, we grew up on giving zakah, we grew up on giving sadaqah, we grew up on doing all those things, to now it's just the norm, it's expected. Or do you do it because you really want to do it? Because you really try to reach the purpose of this? When the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever fasts the month of Ramadan, believing in the month and expecting the goodness out of this month, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives their sins up to that point, is that what we're really trying to reach? Is this really my goal going into this Ramadan? Or is it just a matter of fasting the day and then hanging out with the family and doing Taraweeh and enjoying the good food that we have in this month?